Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Early Saturday afternoon, some massive news for the Missouri Tiger fans coming out of the transfer portal as former Mississippi State wide receiver Kevin Coleman coming back home to the Missouri Tigers. And I'm sure this is a name that many Missouri fans who followed the recruiting trail closely remember when he was coming out of high school, right? Former Missouri kid, goes to Jackson State, then to Louisville, then to Mississippi State. What I love most about this get in Kevin Coleman is he is trending in the right direction. I mean, last year in 2024 at Mississippi State was by far the best version of Kevin Coleman that we've seen. We all knew he was an extremely talented kid. We were kind of waiting for it to click at the college football level. It certainly did for him at Mississippi State last year. I believe second in the SEC in both receptions and receiving yards. And what I love most about Kevin Coleman is he's a do-it-all wide receiver. He's a wide receiver that is easy to get involved in your offense. You kind of see some one-dimensional guys that might be gadget guys with the football in their hands or just speedsters working vertically down the field. Kevin Coleman brings all of that into one wide receiver. He's a guy that had over 409 yards after the catch in 2024, 25 missed tackles forced, extremely dynamic with the football in his hands, but also a guy that you see plenty on the film. I can stretch the field and win vertically too. And it's hard to find wide receivers that can kind of bring the best of both worlds. Kevin Coleman, to me, certainly does, and he's trending in the right direction. This is a guy that has gotten better during his time in college football, and there's a real good chance that Missouri gets the best version that we've seen from Kevin Coleman heading into 2025. I think the question is here, does this tip the scales in Missouri's favor for quarterback Miller Moss? We're going to get into that as well. Before we do, and as always, to the Missouri fans, a lot of which y'all been rocking with the boys going back 12 months as we were covering this team in the portal last year. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. It's going to be a busy next couple of weeks. I think we all know that. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, now, before we get into Kevin Coleman and before we get into Miller Moss, I want to give my quick take on this Missouri program. And that is, I think Coach Drink is doing a phenomenal job. Even in 2024, where I was one of those guys, a lot of Missouri fans remember, was banging the table for this Missouri program as a college football playoff team heading into the 2024 year. Some injuries kind of derailed that season. And quite frankly, just Missouri, it didn't come together at kind of like we thought it was in 2024. But from a talent acquisition and roster building standpoint, I think Coach Drink's doing a phenomenal job. I mean, this is a program that is recruiting the high school ranks quite well, like top 20 pretty consistently in the high school recruiting rankings. And then they're going out and supplementing the transfer portal. I mean, they are blending the use of high school recruiting and the transfer portal just about as good as I think you see anybody in the country. There's some programs that rely probably too heavily in the portal, and that it doesn't always work. There's some programs like Clemson that do a good job recruiting the high school ranks but don't use the portal. It's a tough balance to find. I don't think there's many programs and coaches that are doing it better than Coach Drink and the Missouri Tigers. And so, yeah, 2024 was not a year where you felt like it all came together like it should. But you make no mistake about it, Coach Drink is putting this program in a position to be competitive every single year, and that matters. Just giving yourself shots to compete at the highest level of the sport, it's important. And Coach Drink is doing that. Now, getting into Kevin Coleman, again, I think what he was Mississippi State's offense, had over 102 targets, caught 74 of them, so a 72% completion percentage when Kevin Coleman was targeted. That's something that I think is important. When you have a wide receiver that's getting a lot of targets, are good things happening when they get targeted? And a 72% completion percentage with an average completion of 13 yards, that's pretty damn good numbers. And then you go to Kevin Coleman as the athlete, and this is probably what excites me the best is the trajectory and where this kid is going. Like, we all know how talented he was coming out of high school. I'm sure many of y'all listening have watched Kevin Coleman play in person at times. This kid is juiced up, and you were kind of waiting for it to come together. It started to come together against at Mississippi State. Can it be the best version of Kevin Coleman at Missouri? That's kind of what we're looking at. And he's a proven commodity in the SEC. A lot of times what makes it so hard for, SEC programs to recruit out of the transfer portal when you play in the SEC is, hey, okay, you might have been good in the Big 12 or you might have been good in the Mountain West, Is that going to be good enough in the SEC? And that's tough. It's tough to make that jump. We saw Kevin Coleman be good enough in the SEC last year at Mississippi State. Although the team stunk, Kevin Coleman wasn't. Kevin Coleman was quite good. And so I think that matters a lot too. Multidimensional. We talked about that. I think let's get into the conversation about Miller Moss. And I am a massive fan of Miller Moss. Probably one of the bigger fans you'll find. I think this would be a massive get for Missouri for a couple of different reasons. One, I think Miller Moss is just a underrated player. I think he's a really good player, which we're going to get into, but a perfect bridge for a guy like Matt Zollers. I think Missouri is looking for a quarterback. Like, we kind of know Drew Pine ain't that guy. I don't think Missouri's going to win a ton of games with Drew Pine at quarterback. You're looking for a quarterback that can come in, win you a lot of games in 2025, and kind of bridge that gap for Matt Zollers, who I think is an absolute stud coming in the 2025 class. Doesn't get any better than Miller Moss. One thing I love about Miller Moss, he's been developed by one of the best quarterback minds that you see in college football in Lincoln Riley the last 3 years. And I think secondly, you look at Miller Moss and say, we've seen some really good football from Miller Moss at his time at USC. Go back to that week 1 against LSU where Miller Moss was just spinning it all around the yard. You see some really good things from Miller Moss. And I think one of the biggest problems that Miller Moss ran into is just wasn't getting enough from this offensive line and pass protection early at USC. Now, the offensive line got better as the season went on, but I think any USC fan listening to this knows early on in the season, it was a problem for USC, and Miller Moss was taking a ton of hits. Kind of reminds me a little, probably not the athlete that Brady Cook is, but kind of the gamer that Miller Moss brings, kind of similar to Brady Cook. Like, Brady Cook was one thing Brady Cook was, he was tough. And I think Miller Moss is tough too. And he kind of stuck it out behind an offensive line that was struggling. He gets the ball out quick. He's normally accurate with the ball placement. There were a few turnover problems for Miller Moss. Again, yes, Miller Moss needs to clean that up. And this was his first year starting. So you might get a better version of Miller Moss in 2025. Hey, when you're facing pressure on 40% of your dropbacks, which was the case for Miller Moss, it's hard to avoid some turnovers. When he was kept clean, 68% completion percentage, 14 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions, 43% completion percentage, throwing the football 20-plus yards down the field, which is a very good number. I don't think Miller Moss gets enough credit for the upside he can bring, too. So not only can he be a bridge quarterback, but if you put Miller Moss in the right spot with a solid offensive line, with a solid run game, with wide receivers on the outside, I think Miller Moss can be a damn good quarterback. And does the addition of a bona fide wide receiver 1 in the SEC make Miller Moss look at Missouri and say, yeah, that's the place where I want to go play my last year of college football? We'll certainly break it down if Miller Moss comes to Missouri, which might happen any minute at this point. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.